Alrighty, here we go. Now, in simple form, basically this is a T3M, but it has both of the option kits already applied to it and a few other little bits and pieces. Now, the T3M comes with a double deck motor mount. This is the single big blocky motor mount that goes from basically here all the way back to here. It includes a mount for the actual motor, but it also allows you the option, which is pretty good, and we've actually done a tiny little adjustment to the mount itself to allow the actual servo, so the ESC wide, to run right underneath the mount and come out just in front here. You can't quite see it, but that's it there. And it comes up and plugs in, so it has no interference to the motor or anything else as it goes underneath the motor mount. It does not tweak the chassis. It's a nice push in, and there's no tweak to the chassis at all because it literally runs the length of the actual motor mount. Secondary, we have run both the split and the single top deck. This runs literally the single all the way through. This is a 2mm, and we have put, depending on the track that you're on and what you want to try and achieve, we're actually running spacers underneath the actual plate itself. So we're running 1mm here, a 1mm carbon spacer at the front, so it lifts it up a 1mm, and also down at the screw here, which is that single screw, we had a damper unit here mounted, but it didn't work on the track that we were running on. So we went at the recommendation of Jordan Hunting. We went from the damper to the actual screw that locks the chassis in, but we've put a 1mm spacer underneath here. Now these are carbon spacers here and here, but this is a 1mm spacer just underneath here. Still locks in, works, and it worked brilliantly. I got to thank Jordan Hunting for that, because that was more than what I expected it to do. It actually stabilized the car a lot more, and no loss of rotation, no loss of grip. It was brilliant, which was the best part of it. Secondary, we reverted back to, thirdly I say, we reverted back to running the RACEOPT shocks instead of the linear shocks. I find these more plush, because I personally don't like a rebound, and trying to get rebound out of the short little linear shocks is a pain in the bum. So I prefer these. These are fill, squish up, basically lock up at the top, and basically give it a quick clean, put it on. They're so easy to bleed and so easy to fill. Now I run 500 weight oil on these, because these are a progressive progressive body. So it's thin at the top, and then it basically goes wide at the bottom, but the piston goes all the way through to make sure that the actual travel of the piston is equal up and down. It doesn't have any slop left or right, which is really good. Now some people have asked me, how have I mounted the actual eyelets onto these? Because it's not a screw. You've got to screw it straight down and lock it into place and basically space it up as much as you need, depending on what you want to try and achieve. We have used Loctite, but I've used a brand of Loctite which is really good. It locks it in, so you can actually come right down to the point where it's making contact on the spacer, but it's not going to lock it to the point where you can't take it off. There's so many different versions of Loctite on the market. There's Loctite Original, obviously that's a brand name. Then you've got stuff like Bob Smith Industries, we've got the Tamiya, we've got some other stuff that's really aggressive. It just depends on what you want to use. I've run this on every single thread on this, and it once it's set, it has a fair bit of grab on the actual thread, so when you screw it in, you can actually feel it getting tighter. But the thing is, it doesn't stop you from screwing in or screwing out. That's the best part of it. So these are now actually semi-cemented into there, and there was no movement for the whole of SA. So that was really, really good. Now I like these shocks far, far better than the linears. It makes the car feel very plush. A good comment I had from one of the known racers in Australia, when he came over to look at the car while I was trying to set up, and while I was setting up and getting stuff ready, is he felt the actual car thusly like this, and he thought, wow, that's really tight. That's not very soft at all. But when I put the wheels onto the car, he came back, and actually the car felt really soft and pliable and very, very plush. once the tires were on, feeling the car, basically pushing it down, and shows you to see what it felt. It was quite an eye-opening for him to see how plush the car was with these shocks, which was quite very happy for me to hear from him that it felt pretty good. And his name is Anthony Coretti. He did make that comment that it felt really good. I still run the standard sway bars on this, which are the wonderful metal ones, as you can see there. I run 1.4 on the rear and 1.8 in the front. I like the 1.8 in the front. It makes the car feel very solid. It does still change direction very well, no issues there. Every car is different how you set up on a sway bar. Some cars like soft sway bars, some cars like, you know, really aggressive tight stuff. This felt really good at Adelaide, had no problems in the rotation and the tight stuff. Down the straight in the big sweepers, really good. It's a very demanding track. It's got off camber corners, a couple of very tight hairpins, sweeping short and very big flowy fast corners onto the back straight. Car felt really good. Driver was still getting his head around it as usual, but you know, considering how would you call it, aging on a bit, it's a task to try and actually be as good as what the fast drivers are. But it was good fun. It was really good fun. Shockers are brilliant. I like them, so I'm going to keep using them and basically run these with the system as it is with the pivots. Now, to take them off, it's a bit of a drama. Now, it's not intentional how it's done, but this is just the way it is. To take them off, you can't take these off at all. If you're trying to take them off, they won't work. What you've got to do is you've got to take the bumper off and you've got to take this off. So 2 screws, that comes off, then you literally undo the bottom of the screws here, take them off, and then just literally pivot and pop it off. Literally, simple as that. Pop it on, pivot, put it back on, screw it down, 2 screws, that goes back on. The bumper bar has to come off to take those off. You won't get them off otherwise. And it's the same scenario. 3 screws, pop that off. It doesn't do any harm to the actual plastics or otherwise. And do it down the bottom here, pivot and comes off, put it back on, pivot and lock it back down. Easy as pie, no problem. What else was? Oh yeah, now a lot of people have asked why the A-arm front end. Now, I do like running it just without this and just a straight link. That is a matter of choice, okay? Just a matter of choice. This allows a little bit more strength to the front because its only pivot point and strength is the section of the knuckle that goes through the bearings and bolts through the bottom. Now, in all the cars, they run a 12mm screw coming from the bottom into the plastic. I found that's a bit short. It's better to, if you can, change these little suckers to 14mm screws, 2.5 button head 14s. I run stainless steel button head 14s, but you can run whatever you can get your hands on. But the best screws that I've found, because of their inherent strength, and they don't bend very easy, is either Brighton Best or Umbracos, but 2.5 14 button heads. A little bit difficult to get. There are places around the world where you can buy them to put them in, but that's on the washer, much better than just this 12mm. That little bit extra of 2mm thread does make a difference. And the Umbracos, or the Brighton Best brand, which is what we use here in Australia, over the actual orange screws, shitloads better, much more strength. Other part of it that I had a conversation with a chap on Messenger was, why do these break so easy? 2 inherent problems. One, the screw is too short, so you've got to put a 14mm screw in it and a stronger screw. Secondary, that thread is way too long. So when you put your wheel on, you put your nut, you've got a lot of thread that's still exposed, and it usually comes out proud of the actual wheel. So if you think of the wheel face, a portion of it will actually stick past the wheel. Now, this is strong by itself. I've rarely broken that in accidents and not running the A-arm front end, but in offs on the track, and they haven't broken. But I have broken them if I had that thread coming out. So on all the cars I've had and everything I've put together, I've always put the wheel on, the nut, pick your nuts, because they're always thin and bulky ones, and then chop literally the extent of thread that comes past the nut. What it will stop doing is if you're coming into a corner and the boards, and you like, you know, rubbing on a board, if it grabs that, it'll reef the actual arm right off. It will break it quite easily. So make sure that that's cut flush with the face of the nut. So all that's going to happen is the wheel will skim over that surface where it's actually rubbing. Okay, and also when you're rubbing against each other, okay? Do that, cut it short. Dremel does wonders. Then just clean the thread at the end by taking the nut off and making sure you've got no burrs on that. Perfect, no problem at all. I don't mind the horizontal bars, but going forward, I am going to do what Express have done. They actually run carbon with a mount that comes forward and up, so it actually brings the mounting point a little bit more forward, not so close to the actual little blocks for the wing to sit. This is great. It works, but it's done my head in a couple of times. So, you know, that's everyone to their own. I'm going to go back to normal post if and when I can. All right. So it's a choice. It's a choice. Now on the front of this, when you do mount that shock, you can see that it sits very, very close to the bottom. Of here. It's nearly touching. What I'd suggest is when you do put it on, that's about a 2mm spacer. What I do suggest is chamfer that about 1mm back, literally chamfer that at 45 degrees so it misses that on the downstroke. On the upstroke you won't have an issue, but on the downstroke you will, because on the upstroke it actually opens up the actual gap, but on the downstroke it can limit the amount of droop that you have. So yeah, take a file and take 1mm off there, 1mm off there, so the top of the cap can't touch that, even if you go down to say 1.5 or 1 mil. All right, suggested, definitely do that. Okay, now the front end, this is, you can use two different versions of these. There's two options out on the market that you can use. This is half and half. This is standard MTS ball and plastic turnbuckle end. These are the Express with the longer ball. It's a 12mm ball all the way through to the actual bulkhead. Much better to get as much thread down as possible. So this is X-ray, this is X-ray, this is X-ray, this is X-ray. Not X-ray, sorry, Express. I do apologize. Express. This is Schumacher MI8. Okay, get the longer ball that goes into there. Pop out the one that's supplied with this set and put the longer one in. It gives it more placement, more perch of thread into the actual knuckle, so it has less chance of pulling out. Even if you have to put a couple of spacers in there, you have a lot more thread to play with, so it doesn't run out of thread and only held on by 1 or 2 millimeters. So buy that, get the longer version you can out of any of your Schumacher dealers, and then basically screw it in. Now you can see here with this particular set, what I've done is I like the way the car drives. Everyone's got a preference, but I've made these as long as possible. So then what happens is you can see that that's in line. So when you actually have your arm moving up and down, if you have this point here sitting back, it'll actually move the arm forward. So it'll actually have that pulling up and tensioning the actual knuckle. It's not a lot of movement, but it does make a difference. It'll tension the knuckle. As it comes up, it'll actually twist the knuckle and start tensioning it inside the actual ball, so you get a rough feel that it's putting too much load on the bearings. This setup, as it is here, which is 4 degrees, first you do this at 4 degrees, 1.5 degree camber, and then you basically adjust this to accommodate that length there. So when you put your screw in at this at as where it sits, which is 1.5 and 4 degrees back, that will just drop straight into that hole. It's not going to sit weird. It's not going to sit whether it's be, you know, this way or that way on the actual car. So that's a bit tedious to set up, but set this at 1.5. This will always be at 4 because that's a 4 degree block inside there. And what will happen is then this will make sure that the pivoting is up and down identical. There's no movement. It just goes up and down, doesn't do that, and comes forward. Okay, That's the best option I can tell you on that one. So you can run either the Year Racing or the Shoemaker, or you can, and then you can run the Express balls. I like the Express balls here, and you also find that the Year Racing ones are identical. Okay, so you can run Express, Yay, and then Shoemaker, and this is just the standard RACEOPT one. Okay, there's so many variations to that. This is just my choice. It does make it very, very solid on the front, but it is my choice. Does it have an advantage to running it single? No, none whatsoever. Does it stiffen up the front end? Yes. Does it make it better to drive? I can't find the difference. I can run both. Okay, so it makes, for me, I can't find the difference. Okay, because this doesn't have a tower going across, I run a brace at the front. That's just one of the old backbone top decks, and just cut it down and put it across there, so it has no chance of actually tweaking the top deck, tweaking the blocks I should say, inside and outside under load. Okay, the actual spacer here that gives this 1mm height is a brace as well. It goes across and it braces it, so the actual block is solid. There's no movement or on the actual bearing carriers and on the bearings, so there's no chance of that actually catching. All right. As he goes, a couple of the people online have commented, why am I running the R3 and R3 Pro setup instead of the actual pendulum setup steering? I prefer this. I'm losing my voice again. I prefer this only because of the amount of, let's be honest, the amount of stuff that's here. Okay, everything else will get in the way. If you do all this, you find that this allows you more scope for adjustability and also cleaner fit. You do have to buy the posts, you do have to buy the links, you do have to buy the drag link. I call that a drag link, but some people have a different name to it. This is all standard off the kit, so you don't change that. Now I run, the biggest problem with running any steering, regardless of what it may be, is I run the Year Racing horn with 2.5 spacer with a long ball to connect it down to the drag link. The reason being that is all of this is 90 degrees, so this is 90 degrees to that, is parallel to the actual tie rods. So everything works mechanically, everything works in unison. If you have this sitting off at an angle, you're going to find you're going to have big nightmares of trying to actually set it up on your radio with equal throw. You need this all to be parallel. Also, the other thing is, people ask, why is this, with your steering set obviously as a per driving forward, why is this horn set off at an angle? It's literally 1 tooth in, which is roughly 5 degrees. The reason being is that when you look at any mechanical device, the best way to explain it is you want everything to be 45 degrees of each other. Now if you run your horn cocked over like that, and you have this down onto your drag link, you're going to find that there is the angles between the actual short steering link and the horn aren't going to be 90 degrees to each other, so it's not going to have equal throw in one direction and it's going to have less in the other. It's going to reach the end of its travel at one point. Coffee coming up later, I can tell you this right now. So that 5 degrees, you find that everything sits at 90 degrees, which means movement down and movement back is going to be equal. So when you try and set it up on your radio, I had a conversation with my mate Nick about this, and he asked why, and I said always, mechanically everything has to be set up first before you even start thinking about anything in electronics on the radio. And I explained why, and he went, holy cow, I didn't know that. But it's good, it's something that he's learned and he's applied to his cars, and it does make a difference to how you set everything up. You can go Ackerman on the actual drag link itself, so the steering rods can be a little bit out, a little bit back. It gives you a different amount of rake in the steering, so instead of just being parallel as it turns, it'll actually rake in a bit more, so you'd be able to get a little bit, the inside wheel turning a little bit more than the outside, or you can have it like a lot of Formula 1 cars actually have at the moment, from what I understand, is they have steering but the inside is not as aggressive, so it doesn't bite as aggressively into a corner. So instead of having all that extra turn on the inside, the actual wheels are not parallel, but there's slightly less turning on the inside one. Just gives it a bit more stability coming into the corner. Alrighty. And we go along as we go along. All the rear is standard. I don't do any changes to this. This just stays as it is. Oh, that's right, yes. Carbon top plate for the bumper bar. It just makes sure that the damn thing doesn't break. The plastic, oops, I'm just going to move that out of the way. The plastic doesn't have enough reach to the bulkheads, so these extend further back. So they tend to touch the bulkhead. So if you have a front end hit, it's going to have a tiny little bit of flex, not a lot, but it takes a bit of impact, and then it stops feeding itself further back. So there's less chance of snapping this portion here, which what happens when it actually flexes too much. So this one actually has about 2 millimeters gap, so it has a little bit of flex, and then it hits the actual deck. So it's not completely on to shatter the carbon immediately when you hit something, unfortunately, which happens. It just happens. So carbon, this is made by myself under the brand of Pit Lane Hobbies. The top deck is just a standard top deck. These are made by myself as well. Plus also you got the original to look at as well at 1.6, 2 and 2.2. The spacers are made by myself through a carbon genius down here called Paul Sims from Berserk. He makes all my carbon bits. Now, the T-bar I leave in. I don't take it out. I tried driving it with the T-bar out, the brass T-bar. Oh, it was woeful. Absolute nightmare, but it's not bolted directly to the chassis. What I've done on this one is it's got about a 1/2 mil space underneath, so it has a screw at this point at the first locking point of the car. Come that first locking point on the T-bar has the screw, a washer, then a T-bar on top, but it's not actually bolted down at any point here. It literally has just a grub screw and also a 1 mil spacer underneath the actual T-bar to the chassis. So it allows, it's locked in here, but it's not locked here, so it allows the chassis still to flex to some extent at that point, and it works really nice. No issues at all. It's amazing how much grip this generates, even though comments are that it's a very stiff chassis. It might be stiff, but these shocks and the way it's set up, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Alrighty, the what do you call it? The body battery locks. These are made by myself. They're literally just a really thick, basically carbon hook. So you can drop your body in. There's a bad battery in, so there's no chance of the battery coming out from that hook at all. So when you drop it in, fully adjustable to height, whatever you have, whether it be 22, 25, 24 millimeter with a couple of spacers, then literally just lock it up just before you race, and that will not come out at all, which is the best part of it. I like those. Good idea. We put them, implemented it. Paul cut them. They're basically an item that I do sell. Alrighty, as I said, the actual motor mount is bolted. 1 screw at the front, 2 screws at the rear. I can take that off for a little bit more flex, but I like the way it runs like this at the moment. I'll always play around with it. Obviously, take it out next truck and see what happens. But what it does is on the side of the motor, and you see the actual motor mount has had a recess milled into it a little bit more to allow the wire to go in. I'll grab a mount and show you. I think I've got a mount spare. Oops, sorry, I had to find the mount where I put it. When you look at the mount, see how it's shiny on that portion there? Well, that's actually been milled out at least another 0.8 millimeter, so it leaves you enough clearance so when you drop it down onto your chassis, your wire can actually, from your ESC, can enter from there, creep all the way underneath that, just to exit here and into the receiver. This was done by one of our local machinists, and he's done such a brilliant job. It's nice and clean. It still has all your mounting points there, but it does not affect the tweak on the chassis, because that area there, you can't. I don't understand why someone would say that's going to affect tweak. There's bugger all movement in that little portion there on the actual chassis itself. That's worked brilliantly. Okay, so that has made it easy to try and install everything to make it look nice. Chassis is just a standard chassis. They feel nice. You can get option chassis as well, but this works really, really, really good. I don't bother changing that. I just leave it as it is. Now, what we've done to the top deck, as I said, for a couple of races at Brendale and also at Adelaide, we've actually added a 1mm spacer there, 1mm underneath there, and 1mm spacer there. These are carbon like a I-beam spacer for the front, spacer for the rear, and a little one there, and that allows it to have a tiny little bit more flex compared to other chassis on the market. It hasn't got a lot of flex, but it does work just as it is, instead of it having a car so it's so sloppy when you try and move it. That is the chassis part of it. Now, I've had big problems with the actual idler and the spur, with a lot of slop and the actual idlers rubbing on the actual mounts itself. What we've found out, well, you have to change the spacer. When you actually put all your gears on, you have to put a washer. Now the best washer is a 4x7. Okay, so 4 internal, 7 outside, and you get different shim thicknesses. You get 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, you also get a 0.5. Get a 4x7, so it actually goes just past the actual size of the hole on the idler. So it'll actually hold the idler in place. When you put your bearing in, your bearing is a 4x8, so it's not going to go as